I didn't realize my daughter had forgotten my birthday until the day quietly passed without a single word. It wasn't the silence itself that hurt at first. It was how ordinary the day felt. The same morning light through the kitchen window. The same slow routine of coffee, toast, and the faint hum of the refrigerator. If I hadn't known the date, I might have thought it was just another Tuesday. But I did know. I had woken up with that small, almost childlike awareness that today was different. Not because I expected anything grand. At my age, you stop expecting surprises. You don't wait for parties or gifts or attention. But you do expect something. A call. A message. A simple, "Happy birthday, Dad." That used to be enough. I sat at the kitchen table that morning a little longer than usual, holding my mug between my hands, letting the warmth settle into my fingers. The house was quiet in the way it always is now. Not an uncomfortable silence, just the kind that settles in after years of children growing up and leaving. There was a time when birthdays didn't feel quiet at all. When my daughter was little, she used to wake up earlier than I did on my birthday. I remember the sound of her small footsteps running down the hallway, the way she tried to whisper but never quite managed it. She'd burst into the bedroom holding something she had made, usually a crooked card, folded unevenly, covered in bright crayon colors and misspelled words. "Happy birthday, Dad!" she'd say, beaming like she'd just created something extraordinary. And in a way, she had. I kept those cards. I still do. They're in a small box in the hallway closet, tucked behind some old photo albums. Every now and then, I take them out and look at them. Not for long. Just enough to remember what her handwriting looked like when she was learning how to spell. Back then, birthdays weren't about me. They were about the ritual. Pancakes in the morning. A slightly burned attempt at something special for dinner. Balloons taped awkwardly to the wall. Laughter that filled every room. And her. Always her. She used to sit across from me at the table, swinging her legs because they didn't quite reach the floor yet, watching me like I was the most important person in the world. It's strange how something so simple can become something so distant. That morning, I finished my coffee and glanced at my phone on the table. No notifications. No missed calls. Just the date in the corner of the screen, quietly reminding me what day it was. I told myself it was still early. People have their own lives. Jobs. Responsibilities. Mornings can get busy. I understood that. I've always tried to be the kind of father who understands things without needing them explained. So I stood up, rinsed my mug, and went about the rest of my day. I made the bed. Watered the small plant near the window. Took out the trash. Ordinary things. Small routines that fill the space where bigger moments used to be. Around mid-morning, I went for a walk. I do that most days now. There's a park about 10 minutes from the house, and if the weather's decent, I like to take the long path around the lake. I passed a young father there, holding his child's hand. The boy couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. He was talking nonstop, asking questions the way children do, about everything and nothing at the same time. "Why is the water moving like that? Do ducks sleep at night? Can we come back tomorrow?" The father answered every question, patient, smiling, fully there. I slowed down a little as I walked past them, not because I meant to, but because something in that moment pulled at me. I remembered those questions. My daughter used to ask them too. She was always curious. Always thinking. She'd follow me around the house, asking why things worked the way they did, why the sky changed color in the evening, why we had to grow up at all. I never had all the answers. But that never seemed to matter to her. What mattered was that I listened. By the time I got back home, it was close to noon. I checked my phone again without thinking. Still nothing. No message. No call. I told myself again that it didn't mean anything. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she had something important going on. Life has a way of pulling people in different directions. I've always believed that love doesn't disappear just because it isn't constantly spoken. But there's a difference between quiet love and absence. I made myself some lunch. Something simple. A sandwich, a piece of fruit, a glass of water. I sat at the table again, in the same spot as the morning, the same place where so many years of conversations had once happened. It felt bigger now, the table. Not physically, but in the way empty spaces can stretch when no one is there to fill them. I found myself looking at the chair across from me. For a moment, I could almost picture her there. Not as she is now, but as she was. Younger. Talking about her day at school. Telling me stories that seemed so important at the time. Laughing at things that didn't make much sense to anyone else. I wondered when exactly that stopped. Not the talking. Not the visits. But the feeling of being part of her daily life. There wasn't a single moment I could point to. It just changed. Gradually. The way seasons change. You don't notice it happening day by day, but one morning you wake up and everything feels different. In the afternoon, I decided to go through some old things. Not because I was feeling particularly nostalgic, but because the day felt long, and I needed something to do. I opened the closet and pulled out the box of old cards. The one she gave me when she was 7 had a drawing of the two of us. At least, I think it was supposed to be us. The proportions were off, the colors didn't match anything real, but there was something about it that felt more honest than any photograph. "You are the best dad ever," it said in uneven letters. I smiled when I read that. Not because I believed it now, but because I remembered how much she meant it then. I sat there on the floor for a while, flipping through those cards, letting the memories come and go without trying to hold on to them too tightly. Time does something strange to memories. It softens them. Not enough to forget, but enough to make them feel distant, like they belong to someone else. By the time I put the box away, the light outside had started to fade. Evening was coming. And still, nothing. That was the moment something shifted. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way. Just a quiet realization settling in. This wasn't about being busy. This wasn't about timing. This was something else. I walked back into the kitchen and turned on the small lamp near the table. The warm light filled the room, just enough to make it feel less empty. I sat down again, this time without the coffee, without anything to distract me. Just me. The table. And the quiet. I looked at my phone one more time. Still no message. And for the first time that day, I stopped making excuses for it. Not out of anger. Not out of bitterness. Just clarity. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't what happens. It's what doesn't. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath, the kind that feels heavier than it should. I didn't feel forgotten. Not exactly. But I did feel something close to it. And as I sat there in that quiet room, with the day almost gone and nothing to mark it, I began to wonder if this was just a single moment. Or the beginning of something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see yet. The evening settled into the house the way it always does now, quietly, without announcement. The light outside turned from soft gold to that deep blue that lingers just before night fully arrives. I stayed at the table longer than I needed to, my phone still resting there in front of me, face up, as if it might suddenly change its mind. It didn't. I eventually stood up and made myself a simple dinner. Nothing special. I didn't feel like cooking anything elaborate, not that I usually do anymore. A bowl of soup, a slice of bread. I ate slowly, not out of intention, but because there was no reason to rush. That used to be different. Dinner used to be the part of the day when everything came together. When no matter how busy things were, we sat down as a family. There were rules back then, no phones at the table, no television, just conversation. Sometimes it was messy. Sometimes there were disagreements. But there was always something shared. My daughter used to tell me about her day in long, winding stories. She never got straight to the point. She'd start with one thing, then remember something else halfway through, then circle back again. I used to tease her about it. "You're taking the scenic route," I'd say. She'd laugh and say, "It's more interesting that way." And it was. I never realized how much I'd missed those long, unnecessary details. Now, most of my dinners are quiet. Not in a painful way. Just quiet. After I finished eating, I washed the dishes and dried them slowly, placing each one back in its place like I've done thousands of times before. There's a rhythm to it. A familiarity. The kind of thing you don't think about until you're doing it alone. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 7:42 p.m. Still nothing. That's when I picked up the phone. Not to check it this time, but to do something else. I scrolled to her name. It was still there, just like always. Same contact photo. Same number. Nothing had changed on the surface. My thumb hovered over the call button. I thought about pressing it. I thought about hearing her voice, even if it was just for a minute. Even if she didn't remember. Even if I had to be the one to say it first. But something stopped me. Not pride. Not exactly. It was something quieter than that. It was the feeling that if I called her, I'd be filling in a space that she didn't even realize was empty. And for the first time, that didn't feel right. So I set the phone back down. I didn't call. I sat there for a moment, staring at nothing in particular, letting that decision settle in. It wasn't a big decision. Not something anyone else would notice. But it felt like a turning point, even if I couldn't fully explain why. I moved into the living room and turned on the lamp by the couch. The television stayed off. I've never liked having it on just for the sake of noise. I sat down, leaned back, and listened to the quiet. There's a difference between silence when you're young and silence when you're older. When you're young, silence feels temporary. Like it's just a pause between moments. When you're older, it feels more permanent. Like something that has settled in and decided to stay. I closed my eyes for a moment and let my thoughts drift. I found myself going back, not to birthdays this time, but to ordinary days. The kind that didn't seem important at the time. Driving her to school in the mornings. Waiting outside after practice. Helping her learn how to ride a bike. She was always determined. Even when she fell, she'd get back up quickly, brushing off the dirt like it didn't matter. Again, she'd say. And I'd hold on to the back of the seat, running alongside her, letting go just a second before she realized I had. She didn't like the idea of needing help for too long. I suppose that was always part of who she was. As the years went on, those moments changed. They became less frequent. Less necessary. She learned to do things on her own. Made her own decisions. Built her own life. That's what you want as a parent. Or at least, that's what you think you want. Because no one really tells you what comes after that. They tell you how to raise a child. How to guide them. How to support them. But they don't tell you how to step back. They don't tell you how to sit in a quiet house and realize that the person who once needed you for everything doesn't need you in the same way anymore. And they definitely don't tell you what it feels like when the connection starts to fade. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, in ways that are easy to ignore at first. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. Everything was the same as it had always been. The same furniture. The same pictures on the wall. The same small details that make a place feel like home. But it didn't feel the same. Not entirely. There was a space in it now that hadn't always been there. I reached over and picked up the remote, turning on the television without really thinking about what I wanted to watch. Some program filled the room with background noise, voices talking about things that didn't matter. I wasn't really listening. My mind kept returning to the same thought. Not that she forgot. But that she didn't remember. There's a difference. Forgetting implies something temporary. Something accidental. Not remembering feels different. It feels like something has shifted. Like something that used to matter doesn't hold the same place anymore. I sat there for a while, letting that thought settle in, trying not to push it away the way I had earlier in the day. Because the truth is, this hadn't happened all at once. There had been other moments. Smaller ones. Easy to overlook. Calls that became shorter. Visits that became less frequent. Conversations that felt surface level. I had noticed them, of course, but I hadn't given them much weight. I told myself she was busy, that life gets complicated, that things change. And all of that is true. But sometimes, those small changes add up to something bigger. Something you don't fully see until a day like this. A day that passes quietly. A day that used to matter. A day that now doesn't seem to carry the same weight. The television continued to play in the background, but I reached over and turned it off. The silence returned. I stood up and walked toward the hallway, pausing for a moment near the closet where the box of old cards was kept. I didn't open it this time. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. Instead, I kept walking, heading toward the bedroom. I turned off the lights as I went, one by one, leaving only the soft glow from the hallway behind me. When I reached the bedroom, I sat down on the edge of the bed and took off my watch, placing it on the nightstand. Another habit. Another small routine. I glanced at my phone one last time. Still nothing. And strangely, it didn't surprise me anymore. That was the part that felt different. Earlier in the day, I had been waiting. Now, I wasn't. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the day replay in my mind. Not the whole day. Just certain moments. The morning light. The empty table. The walk in the park. The cards in the box. And the quiet realization that had settled in somewhere between all of it. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel abandoned. But I did feel something I hadn't quite felt before. Like I had been holding on to a version of our relationship that no longer existed. Not because she didn't care, but because things had changed in ways I hadn't fully accepted yet. I turned off the lamp and let the room fall into darkness. The kind that feels heavier at night. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come right away. Instead, I lay there thinking about what this meant. Not just for today, but for everything moving forward. Because this wasn't just about a birthday. It was about something deeper. Something quieter. Something that had been building over time. And as I lay there in the dark, I began to understand that this day hadn't just revealed something about her. It had revealed something about me. About what I had been holding on to. And about what I might need to let go of. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset in the way people expect. No pacing, no anger, no restless thoughts chasing each other in circles. It was quieter than that. The kind of wakefulness that sits gently in the background, like something waiting to be understood. At some point, I must have drifted off, because when I opened my eyes again, the room was filled with that soft early morning light. For a moment, I forgot what day it was. And then I remembered. Not the date itself, but what it had been. My birthday had come and gone. And now it was just another morning. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, letting that settle in. It didn't hurt the way I thought it might. It felt clearer. I got up, went through the same routine as always. Coffee. Toast. The quiet hum of the house waking up around me. But something inside me had shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. I wasn't waiting anymore. That was the difference. I sat at the table, the same seat as yesterday, but without that subtle expectation sitting in the background. My phone was still there, but it felt neutral now. Just an object, not something I kept glancing at. I took a sip of coffee and looked around the room. It hadn't changed. But I had. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think about something I hadn't fully faced before. Maybe this wasn't about her forgetting. Maybe it was about me holding on. Holding on to the version of her that used to run down the hallway with a handmade card. Holding on to the version of myself that was needed in every small part of her life. But that version doesn't stay. It's not supposed to. Children grow up. They build their own lives, their own routines, their own priorities. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, they stop orbiting around you. That doesn't mean they don't care. It just means they've moved. And maybe I hadn't moved with that reality as much as I thought I had. After breakfast, I did something I hadn't planned. I went back to the closet and took out the box again. This time, I didn't just flip through it. I sat down with it. Really sat with it. I opened each card slowly, reading every word, looking at every uneven line and every color that didn't quite stay inside the edges. There was one from when she was about 9. "Thank you for always helping me," it said. "Even when I don't listen." I smiled at that. Even then, she had her own way of doing things. Her own independence. Her own voice. I hadn't lost that. It had just grown. Changed shape. I closed the box and held it in my hands for a moment. Then I stood up, walked back to the closet, and put it away. But this time, it felt different. Not like I was storing something precious away. More like I was acknowledging it. Letting it be what it was. Not trying to bring it into the present where it no longer belonged. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Around midday, I went outside again. The same walk, the same path, the same lake. But I didn't slow down this time. I didn't linger on the same thoughts. I just walked. I noticed things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way the light reflected on the water. The sound of the wind through the trees. The small details that exist whether you're thinking about them or not. At some point, I realized something simple. My life hadn't become smaller. It had just become quieter. And maybe I had mistaken quiet for absence. When I got back home, I didn't check my phone right away. I didn't feel the need to. I made myself lunch, sat at the table again, and ate without that underlying expectation I hadn't even realized had been there before. It was just a meal. Just a moment. And somehow, that felt enough. Later in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. I looked at it. Her name. For a second, I just stared at it. Not with urgency. Not with relief. Just noticing. I picked it up and answered. "Hey," she said, her voice familiar in a way that still felt the same, even after everything. "Hey," I replied. There was a brief pause. "I was thinking about you," she said. I didn't say anything right away. Not because I was upset. But because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't about yesterday. It wasn't about whether she remembered or not. It was about right now. "I'm glad you called," I said. And I meant it. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing heavy. Just a conversation. About her day. About something that had happened at work. About a small problem she was trying to figure out. At one point, she asked, "What do you think?" It was a simple question. But it carried something with it. Not the same weight it used to have. Not the same need. But still, something. I paused for a moment before answering. And when I did, I kept it simple. Not because I didn't have more to say. But because I understood something now that I hadn't before. She wasn't looking for answers the way she used to. She wasn't looking for direction. She was just sharing. And that was enough. When the call ended, I set the phone down and sat there for a moment. The house was quiet again. But it didn't feel the same as yesterday. It didn't feel empty. It just felt still. I looked around the room, at the table, at the chair across from me, at the space that had once been filled with so many different versions of our lives. And I realized something I hadn't been able to see clearly before. She hadn't stopped caring. She had just stopped needing me in the same way. And maybe I had been measuring our relationship by the wrong things. By how often she called. By what she remembered. By how much she needed my advice. But maybe that's not what love looks like at this stage. Maybe it's quieter. Less visible. But still there. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking outside as the light began to soften again. Another evening coming. Another day ending. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I felt like I was part of something that had simply changed. Not disappeared. Not broken. Just different. And as I stood there, watching the light fade, I understood something I wish someone had told me years ago. Children don't stop caring when they grow up. They just stop showing it in the ways you're used to. And sometimes learning to see that is part of growing older too.